Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and tell us what city you're tuning in from. And don't forget to give this story a rating from 0 to 10 when we reach the end. Now, let's begin. The October evening air carried a bite of approaching winter as I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, stepping out of the downtown Chicago library where I'd been working the closing shift. My name is Rebecca Hayes, and for the past 8 months, this had been my routine. Clock out at 9, walk 3 blocks to the Brown Line, ride 20 minutes to my studio apartment in Lincoln Square, heat up whatever leftovers I could afford, and collapse into bed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Safe. Predictable. Everything my life in Miami hadn't been. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I descended the library steps. I fished it out, expecting a reminder about my electric bill or maybe a message from Kara, the only real friend I'd made since moving to Chicago. Instead, an unknown number glowed on the screen, followed by a text that made my blood run cold. Rebecca, it's time we talked about what you owe. Tomorrow, noon, Millennium Park by the Bean. Come alone. My fingers went numb around the phone. I knew that phrasing, that tone. My brother Jacob. It had been 8 months since I'd fled Miami. 8 months since I'd emptied my savings account and driven 16 hours straight to put distance between myself and the mess he'd created. 8 months of hoping he'd forgotten about me, that whatever trouble he'd gotten into had resolved itself without dragging me down, too. I should have known better. I spent the entire train ride home staring at that message, my mind racing through possibilities. Jacob had always been the charming one, the risk-taker, the boy who could talk his way into or out of anything. But charm only carried you so far when you started borrowing money from people who didn't accept excuses as payment. 2 years ago, he'd gotten involved with some import-export business that I'd known from the start was probably illegal. When I'd pressed him, he'd laughed it off, told me I worried too much, that everything was under control. 6 months later, men in expensive suits started showing up at the apartment we shared, asking questions about shipments and schedules and money. Lots of money. Jacob had disappeared for 3 weeks that time, and when he came back, his left hand was in a cast and he wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I knew I had to leave. Whatever hole he'd dug for himself, I couldn't let him bury me in it too. But apparently, leaving hadn't been enough. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the water stain on my ceiling, watching shadows from passing cars slide across the walls. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jacob's face, that mix of desperation and manipulation he'd perfected over the years. The face that said, "I need you, sis. You're the only one who can help me." By morning, I'd made my decision. I would meet him, I would listen, and then I would make it crystal clear that whatever debt he'd accumulated, whatever trouble he'd brought to my doorstep, I wanted no part of it. I'd built a new life here, small, yes, lonely sometimes, but it was clean, honest, mine. I called in sick to work, the first time I'd done so in 8 months. My supervisor, Mrs. Miller, sounded concerned, asked if I needed anything. Her kindness almost broke me. I mumbled something about a migraine and hung up before the tears could start. Millennium Park was crowded even on a Tuesday afternoon. Tourists posing for photos in front of the mirrored bean sculpture, families sprawled on the grass despite the October chill, street musicians filling the air with jazz and blues. I arrived 15 minutes early and positioned myself near the bean where I could see approaching from multiple directions. An old habit from my Miami days, when being aware of your surroundings wasn't paranoia, but survival. I spotted Jacob before he spotted me. He'd always been handsome in that effortless way some people are, tall and lean with sun-streaked brown hair and a smile that made strangers trust him instantly. Today, though, he looked different. Thinner. Harder. He wore a leather jacket I didn't recognize and kept glancing over his shoulder as he walked. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, both built like they spent their lives in gyms, both wearing the kind of dead-eyed expression that said violence was just part of the job. My stomach clenched. This wasn't going to be a conversation. This was something else entirely. Becca. Jacob's smile was strained as he approached, using the childhood nickname I'd asked him to stop using years ago. You look good. Chicago's treating you well. I didn't return the smile. What do you want, Jacob? One of the men chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. Jacob's expression flickered, something like shame crossing his face before he buried it. Can't a guy just want to see his sister? Not when that guy brings muscle to a family reunion. I crossed my arms, fighting to keep my voice steady. I left Miami to get away from whatever mess you're in. I'm not interested in being dragged back into it. See? That's the thing. Jacob stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of cigarettes in desperation. You don't get to just walk away. Not when you're listed as co-signer on certain documents. Not when certain people think you might know where certain assets are located. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are you talking about? I never co-signed anything for you. Yeah, well, he had the decency to look uncomfortable. Remember when you let me borrow your license to pick up that package for you 3 years ago? Turns out I might have used your information for a few other things. Business loans. Import contracts. Nothing major. The world tilted sideways. You committed fraud using my identity? Fraud is such an ugly word. The larger of the 2 men stepped forward, and I noticed for the first time the bulge under his jacket. A gun. My mouth went dry. Let's call it creative financing. The point is, Miss Hayes, you're on paper as owing some very serious people a very large sum of money. $350,000 to be exact. I actually laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. I'm a library assistant. I make $32,000 a year. I don't have that kind of money. I've never seen that kind of money. We know. This from the second man, slightly smaller but with eyes that made my skin crawl. That's why we're here with a proposal. Jacob couldn't meet my gaze. Becca, listen, these guys work for someone important. Someone who can make this whole thing go away if you just do one small favor. What kind of favor? I heard myself ask, even though every instinct screamed to run. The larger man smiled, revealing teeth too white and too perfect. Information. We know you're smart, educated. You speak some Italian, right? Studied it in college? How did they know that? I minored in Italian studies, yes. What does that have to do with anything? There's a man in Chicago, businessman, very private, very careful. He's about to close a deal that would cost our employer a significant amount of money. We need someone to get close to him, learn his schedule, his plans, someone he wouldn't suspect. The man's eyes crawled over me, appraising. Someone like you. You want me to spy on someone? The absurdity of it would have been funny if my brother's life, and apparently mine, weren't hanging in the balance. I'm a librarian, not James Bond. We're not asking. The smaller man's voice dropped, losing any pretense of civility. You do this, feed us information for 2 weeks, and your debt is cleared. You and your brother walk away, no harm, no foul. You refuse? He let the sentence hang, but his hand drifted to his jacket, to where I knew the gun waited. My legs felt weak. And if I go to the police? Jacob flinched. The larger man just laughed. Go ahead. Tell them. Your brother forged your signature on loan documents tied to 3 offshore accounts currently under federal investigation. Tell them you fled Miami right before the FBI started asking questions. See how that works out for you. He was right, and we both knew it. Even if I was innocent, the paper trail Jacob created would take years to untangle. Years of legal fees I couldn't afford, of my name dragged through investigations, of my carefully rebuilt life destroyed. And that was assuming these men let me live long enough to testify. "Who is he?" I asked quietly, hating myself for even considering it. "This businessman you want me to spy on?" The men exchanged glances. "His name is Luca Moretti. He owns several restaurants in Chicago, some real estate. Mostly legitimate businesses, but with connections to less legitimate operations. Our employer has reason to believe Moretti's about to make a move that would shift the balance of power in this city. We need to know what that move is." Luca Moretti. The name sounded vaguely familiar, something I'd maybe overheard at the library, patrons gossiping about local businessmen. But I knew nothing substantial about him. And how exactly am I supposed to get close to someone like that? I doubt he hangs out at the library. He's hosting a charity gala this Friday night at his restaurant, Impero. $500 a plate. All proceeds going to Chicago literacy programs. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Your library director, Mrs. Miller, already has tickets. 2 of them. We understand she's been looking for someone to accompany her since her husband is traveling for work. They'd done their homework. Mrs. Miller had mentioned the gala last week, had seemed disappointed when I'd made an excuse about not having anything appropriate to wear. The truth was, I couldn't afford a $500 ticket even if I'd wanted to go. "We'll provide the dress, the shoes, everything you need," the larger man continued. "You go to the gala, you observe Moretti, you listen to his conversations. If you can get him talking, even better. You're pretty enough. Use it." The casual way he said it, like I was a tool to be deployed, made my skin crawl, but what choice did I have? I looked at Jacob, really looked at him, and saw nothing but fear in his eyes. Whatever these people had threatened him with, it was bad enough to make him sacrifice his own sister. 2 weeks, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I do this for 2 weeks, feed you whatever information I can gather, and then we're done. Both of us. No more contact, no more debts, no more threats." Smart girl. The smaller man pulled out a phone, typed something, then showed me the screen. It was a contract, legitimate looking, outlining exactly what I'd just agreed to. "Sign here. Thumbprint here." I should have read it more carefully. Should have insisted on a lawyer, on time to think. But with 2 guns and my brother's terrified face staring at me, I did what they wanted. I signed my name, pressed my thumb to the screen, and watched my life take a turn I'd never be able to walk back from. "Good. Someone will contact you tomorrow with details about the gala. Don't try to run, Rebecca. We know where you work, where you live, where you buy your coffee every morning. And trust me, our employer doesn't appreciate people who break their promises." With that, they turned and melted into the crowd, leaving me alone with Jacob. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and he actually looked it. "Becca, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." I slapped him. The crack of my palm against his cheek echoed in the space between us, loud enough that a passing jogger glanced over. Jacob's head snapped to the side, and when he looked back at me, there were tears in his eyes. Good. He should cry. He should feel even a fraction of the terror coursing through my veins. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice shaking with rage and fear, and something that felt like grief. "Whatever happens after this, whatever I have to do to clean up your mess, you don't get to be part of my life anymore. We're done." I walked away before he could respond, my legs carrying me blindly through the park, past the tourists and families and the life I'd thought I was building. I made it 3 blocks before the adrenaline wore off, and I had to lean against a building, gasping for air, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone. I should call someone. The police. A lawyer. Kara. Anyone. But the men's words echoed in my head. Tell them you fled Miami right before the FBI started asking questions. They weren't bluffing. Jacob's schemes, his forged documents, his creative use of my identity, it had all created a web I was already caught in. Adding federal attention wouldn't free me. It would just tighten the strands. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, staring out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there was Luca Moretti, a man I'd never met, living his life, making his plans, completely unaware that I'd been drafted as a pawn in whatever game was being played around him. And somewhere else were the men who'd cornered me, who thought they could use me as a weapon, who'd given me 2 weeks to gather intelligence on a man whose only crime, as far as I could tell, was being successful and connected. The next morning, a package arrived at my apartment door. No return address, no note, just a garment box from a boutique I'd never be able to afford. Inside was a dress the color of midnight, elegant and simple, with a neckline that was modest, but a back that dipped low. Beside it, a pair of heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a small clutch purse. Everything in my exact size. A card lay at the bottom of the box. Friday, 7 p.m. Mrs. Miller will pick you up at 6:30. Remember, we're watching. I wanted to burn it all. Instead, I hung the dress in my closet and tried to figure out how I'd survive the next 2 weeks. Work that day was torture. Mrs. Miller was thrilled when I mentioned I might be able to attend the gala after all, said something about a friend lending me a dress. She talked excitedly about the event, about how Luca Moretti was such a pillar of the community, how his restaurants employed hundreds of people, how his charitable foundation had rebuilt 3 schools in underserved neighborhoods. She made him sound like a saint. I smiled and nodded and felt sick to my stomach. That evening, unable to stand my own thoughts, I did what I should have done from the start. I researched Luca Moretti. What I found was both reassuring and terrifying. On the surface, he was exactly what Mrs. Miller had described. A successful businessman, philanthropist, pillar of Chicago society. Photographs showed a man in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and darker eyes. Handsome in a way that seemed almost severe, all sharp angles and intensity. But dig deeper, past the charity galas and the glowing newspaper profiles, and he found the whispers. The speculation. He had connections, people said, to families whose names appeared in mob documentaries. His father had emigrated from Naples 30 years ago, with nothing, but somehow had enough capital to open his first restaurant within a year. Luca had taken over the family businesses at 25 when his father died, and in the dozen years since, had expanded into real estate, construction, import-export. That last one made my breath catch. Import-export. Just like Jacob's business. None of it was proven. None of it was ever brought to court. Luca Moretti was clean on paper, his taxes paid, his permits in order, his employees well-treated and loyal. But the rumors persisted because they always did around men who accumulated power quickly and held it tightly. And now I was supposed to spy on him, to smile and charm and gather information that would be used against him by people who clearly saw him as a threat. The absurdity of my situation would have been laughable if I weren't terrified. Friday arrived too quickly. I spent the day in a daze, mechanically checking books in and out, avoiding Mrs. Miller's excited chatter about the evening ahead. At 5 o'clock, I went home and stared at the dress hanging in my closet for a full 15 minutes before forcing myself to shower and begin getting ready. The transformation was startling. The dress fit perfectly, hugging curves I usually hid under cardigans and loose jeans. The heels added 3 inches to my height, making me feel powerful and vulnerable at the same time. I'd done my makeup carefully, subtle but polished, and left my dark hair loose in waves that fell past my shoulders. The woman in the mirror didn't look like a library assistant about to commit espionage. She looked like she belonged at a $500-a-plate charity gala. I hated her a little. Mrs. Miller arrived promptly at 6:30, her face lighting up when I answered the door. "Rebecca, you look absolutely stunning. I knew that dress would be perfect. Your friend has wonderful taste." Guilt twisted in my stomach as I smiled and thanked her, following her down to her car. Mrs. Miller was a genuinely good person, kind and thoughtful, the type of supervisor who remembered birthdays and asked about your life outside of work. She didn't deserve to be used as cover for whatever I was about to do. The drive to Impero took us through downtown Chicago, the evening skyline glittering against the darkening October sky. Mrs. Miller chatted happily about the library's newest acquisitions, about her husband's business trip to Seattle, about how lovely it was to have company for the evening. I made appropriate responses, my mind miles away, rehearsing how I would observe Luca Moretti without being obvious, how I would gather information without arousing suspicion. Impero occupied the ground floor of a historic building in the West Loop, its facade all elegant stonework and warm lighting spilling from tall windows. A valet took Mrs. Miller's car, and we joined the stream of well-dressed attendees flowing through the entrance. Inside, the restaurant was breathtaking. Exposed brick walls, soaring ceilings with wrought iron chandeliers, white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. The air smelled of garlic and wine, and something sweet I couldn't identify. A hostess checked our names against a list, smiled warmly, and directed us to our assigned table. As we wove through the crowd, I scanned faces, looking for the man from the photographs, looking for Luca Moretti. I found him near the back of the dining room, standing with a small group, a glass of red wine in one hand. He was taller than I'd expected, his presence commanding even in a room full of Chicago's elite. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, white shirt, no tie. His dark hair was swept back from his face, emphasizing the strong line of his jaw, the intensity of his eyes. As I watched, he threw his head back and laughed at something someone said, the sound rich and genuine, and I felt an unexpected flutter in my chest. Dangerous, my instincts whispered. This man is dangerous. Our table was positioned with a clear sight line to where Moretti stood, which couldn't have been an accident. The men who'd cornered me had planned everything. I was seated next to a couple in their 60s who introduced themselves as the Hendersons, longtime library supporters. Across from me was a young woman about my age named Vanessa, who worked in marketing for one of Moretti's restaurant groups. "This is my third Impero event," Vanessa said, leaning in conspiratorially as servers began bringing out the first course. "They just keep getting better. And Luca, that's Mr. Moretti. He's honestly the best boss I've ever had. Last month, my mom got sick, and he not only gave me paid leave, he sent flowers to her hospital room." The Hendersons nodded in agreement. "He's done so much for this city," Mrs. Henderson added. "Last year, his foundation provided grants to 5 struggling community centers, saved them from closing." I smiled and made appropriate responses, all while watching Luca Moretti across the room. He'd moved on from the first group, now talking animatedly with an older couple, his attention fully focused on them, his smile warm. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like someone who cared, who listened, who made the people around him feel important. Which, I reminded myself, was probably what made him so dangerous. Dinner was served in multiple courses, each more exquisite than the last. As we ate, Mrs. Miller introduced me to people at nearby tables, mentioned my work at the library, praised my dedication. I was acutely aware of eyes on me, though whether they belonged to Moretti's security or the men who'd sent me, I couldn't tell. The weight of the small phone they'd given me, tucked in my clutch, felt like an anchor. Halfway through the main course, the room's energy shifted. Luca Moretti had taken the small stage at the front, his presence instantly commanding every eye. He spoke about literacy, about opportunity, about how a single book had changed his life when he'd first arrived in Chicago as a child who barely spoke English. His voice carried emotion without being mawkish, sincerity without seeming calculated. When he announced that tonight's event had raised over $200,000 for the library system, the room erupted in applause. Mrs. Miller was beaming, tears in her eyes. "That money will let us expand our children's programs for another 2 years," she whispered to me. "Do you know what that means for the kids in our neighborhood?" I knew. I'd seen those kids, watched them transform when they discovered books, when someone invested time in teaching them to read. What Luca Moretti was doing was genuinely good, and the man who'd sent me to spy on him wanted to destroy it. The realization settled over me like ice water. I'd been so focused on my own survival, on escaping the trap Jacob had created, that I hadn't really considered what my information might cost. Luca Moretti wasn't just some abstract target. He was a man who built schools and supported libraries and made his employees feel valued. And I was supposed to help powerful people tear him down. After dinner, as servers cleared plates and brought out dessert, Luca Moretti began making his way through the tables, thanking attendees personally. My heart rate spiked as he approached our section, moving methodically from table to table, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, giving each person his full attention. And then he was at our table, his presence even more overwhelming up close. He greeted the Hendersons by name, kissed Mrs. Henderson's cheek, asked about their son who was apparently in medical school. He thanked Vanessa for her work on the event's marketing, mentioned a specific campaign she'd run that had been particularly effective. And then his dark eyes turned to Mrs. Miller. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice warm with genuine respect. "The library system is lucky to have you. Thank you for everything you do for our city's children." Mrs. Miller actually blushed. "Mr. Moretti, the thanks should go to you. Your generosity makes our work possible." He waved away the compliment, then turned to me. "And I don't believe we've met." Up close, Luca Moretti was even more striking than his photographs suggested. His eyes weren't just dark, but a deep brown that seemed to see straight through whatever fade you presented. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only imperfection in otherwise classical features. When he smiled, it reached those eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that seemed genuine. "Rebecca Hayes," I managed, accepting his offered hand. His grip was warm and firm, his palm slightly calloused in a way that surprised me. Men of his wealth usually had soft hands. "I work with Mrs. Miller at the library. Rebecca just moved to Chicago earlier this year," Mrs. Miller added, her voice bright with enthusiasm. "She's been an absolute godsend. The children in our reading program adore her." Something flickered across Luca's face, interest perhaps, or curiosity. "Welcome to Chicago, then. Are you enjoying the city?" "Very much," I said, hyper-aware of his hand still holding mine, of the way his thumb had brushed across my knuckles before releasing me. "Though I'm still discovering all it has to offer. Well, if you need recommendations for places to explore, Vanessa here knows all mine restaurants. I'm sure she'd be happy to give you the insider's tour." He smiled at his employee, who nodded enthusiastically, then returned his gaze to me. "You're originally from where?" The question felt casual, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. Did he suspect something? Or was this just how he operated, gathering information about everyone he met? "Miami," I said, sticking as close to the truth as I dared. "But I studied in Boston. This is my first time living in the Midwest." "Miami." He rolled the word thoughtfully. "Beautiful city. I have some business interests there, actually. Import-export, primarily through the port." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. The contrast to Chicago must be significant. "Do you miss the weather?" "Sometimes," I admitted. But there's something about Chicago that feels like home, in a way Miami never did. It was true, surprisingly. Despite everything, despite the trap Jacob had laid and the impossible situation I'd found myself in, Chicago had given me something Miami never had. The feeling that I could be someone other than Jacob's sister, someone other than the girl who made excuses for her brother's schemes. Luca nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment longer than necessary. Well, Miss Hayes, I hope you'll continue to find reasons to love our city. And thank you for the work you do. Literacy programs don't get the recognition they deserve, but they change lives. They certainly changed mine. With a final nod to our table, he moved on, and I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Across the table, Vanessa was grinning. He doesn't usually spend that much time at any one table. I think he liked you. Mrs. Miller patted my hand. Rebecca has that effect on people. She's special. I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Nothing about me was special. I was just a woman, trapped between powerful forces, trying desperately not to get crushed. But I smiled, and thanked them, and tried not to think about the phone in my clutch, waiting for the report I was supposed to send. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dessert and coffee and networking conversations. I watched Luca Moretti from across the room, noted who he spoke with, how long each conversation lasted, the body language that suggested business versus pleasure. He never checked his phone, never seemed rushed or distracted. Every person he engaged with received his complete attention, as if they were the only person in the room. It was calculated, I told myself. A performance designed to build loyalty and trust. But watching him crouch down to speak at eye level with a young girl, watching the genuine delight on his face when she told him about a book she'd read, I couldn't quite make myself believe it. By 10 o'clock, the crowd was thinning. Mrs. Miller had a headache and was ready to leave, which suited me fine. I needed to be alone, to process everything I'd seen, to figure out what information, if any, I was willing to feed to the men who'd blackmailed me. We were collecting our coats when a staff member approached. "Excuse me, Miss Hayes? Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you before you leave. If you have a moment?" My blood turned to ice. "Of course," I heard myself say. Mrs. Miller looked delighted. "Oh, he probably wants to thank you personally for supporting the event. I'll wait for you by the door." The staff member led me through the thinning crowd, past the dining room to a hallway I hadn't noticed before. We stopped at a door marked private, and she knocked once before opening it. "Miss Hayes, sir." The office was smaller than I expected, more functional than ostentatious. A desk dominated the space, covered in neat stacks of papers. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with what looked like actual read books, their spines creased and worn. Luca Moretti stood by the window, his jacket removed, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that confirmed the calluses on his hands. He'd been doing more than sitting behind a desk. "Miss Hayes, thank you for staying." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." I sat, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. "Your employee said you wanted to speak with me?" He moved from the window, but didn't sit behind his desk. Instead, he leaned against it, close enough that I had to look up to meet his eyes. "I like to personally thank significant donors. Mrs. Miller mentioned you contributed to make this evening possible. I hadn't. The men blackmailing me had. It's an important cause. It is." He studied me with that unsettling intensity. "Tell me, Miss Hayes, what made you move to Chicago?" "Mrs. Miller mentioned you arrived 8 months ago." The question hung in the air between us, casual on the surface but weighted with something else. I chose my words carefully. I needed a fresh start. Sometimes, you have to leave behind what's familiar to find what's right. Running from something or running toward something? He asked, his voice gentle but his eyes sharp. "Does it matter? I ended up here either way, A small smile played at his lips. I suppose that's true. I came here from Italy when I was 8. My mother was running from poverty toward opportunity. She used to say the destination matters less than what you do when you arrive. It was the most personal thing he'd shared all evening, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Past tense, I noted. She died when I was 16. Cancer. She'd been working 3 jobs to keep me in school, saving every penny for my college fund. By the time the symptoms got bad enough for her to see a doctor, it was too late. He said it matter-of-factly, but something in his expression betrayed the old wound. That's when I learned that money isn't just about comfort. It's about options, about the difference between life and death. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. Whatever else he was, whatever he might be involved in, the grief he carried for his mother was real. He acknowledged my sympathy with a slight nod, then shifted. Vanessa mentioned you speak Italian. Is that true? The change in subject caught me off guard. I minored in Italian studies in college. I'm not fluent, but I can hold a conversation. Really? That's a useful skill. He switched to Italian, his accent perfect and regional, definitely Neapolitan. What drew you to study Italian? I responded in kind, my accent much more textbook but serviceable. I'd always been fascinated by the language, the culture. I thought maybe I'd use it in international business. He smiled, seeming genuinely pleased. Your accent is very good. Have you ever been to Italy? No, I admitted, switching back to English. It's on my list, though. You should go. Naples, specifically. The city where I was born. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, then showed me an image of a stunning coastal view. This is the view from where my mother grew up. She used to tell me stories about swimming in that water, about the smell of lemons and espresso and the sea all mixed together. I looked at the photograph, at the beauty captured there, and felt an unexpected pang of longing. When was the last time I'd traveled anywhere just for the joy of it? When had I last made plans that extended beyond survival? It's beautiful. It is. I go back once a year, usually in the spring, to remember where I came from, to make sure success doesn't make me forget. He pocketed his phone and his gaze intensified. But enough about me. Tell me, Miss Hayes, are you happy at the library? The question seemed innocent, but alarm bells rang in my head. Yes, very. Mrs. Miller is wonderful to work for. I'm sure she is. But a woman with your education, your skills, working at circulation desk, seems like perhaps a temporary situation. Are you looking for something more permanent? More aligned with your degree? This felt like a job interview, which made no sense, unless he somehow knew why I was really here, unless this whole evening had been a test and I'd failed. My mouth went dry. I'm content where I am for now. Content. He repeated the word as if tasting it. That's not the same as happy, is it? Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. I apologize, I need to take this, but before you go, I wanted to give you this. He moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small cream-colored envelope with my name written across it in elegant script. I took it hesitantly. What is this? An invitation. I host a small dinner every month for people I find interesting. Good conversation, excellent food, an opportunity to connect with others who appreciate both. The next one is Tuesday evening at my home. I'd be honored if you'd attend. This was bad. This was very, very bad. Getting close to Luca Moretti at a public charity event was one thing. Accepting an invitation to his private home was something else entirely. That's very kind, but I'm not sure I'd fit in with your usual guests. I think you'd fit in perfectly. His phone buzzed again, more insistent. The invitation includes all the details. Think about it. And Miss Hayes? He waited until I met his eyes. If you're running from something, Chicago can be a good place to disappear, but only if you're careful about who you trust. The words felt like a warning, but before I could respond, he was answering his phone, speaking rapid Italian that I only partially understood. Something about a shipment and a delay and someone named Carmine who couldn't be trusted. The staff member from before materialized at my elbow. I'll show you out, Miss Hayes. I left in a daze, the invitation burning in my hand. In the main dining room, Mrs. Miller was waiting by the coat check, her headache apparently forgotten in her excitement. Well, what did he want? I held up the envelope. He invited me to a dinner party. Her eyes went wide. Rebecca, that's incredible. You have to go. Luca Moretti's private dinners are legendary, very exclusive. I don't know. It feels presumptuous. Nonsense. He clearly saw something special in you. She linked her arm through mine as we headed for the door. You should go. Who knows what opportunities might come from it? That's what I was afraid of. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in my darkened apartment, staring at the ceiling, the cream-colored invitation on my nightstand, the phone the blackmailers had given me charging beside it. By the cold light of my bedside lamp, I'd examined the invitation thoroughly. Tuesday, 7 o'clock, at an address in Lincoln Park that a quick search revealed was a historic mansion worth somewhere in the 8-figure range. Dress code: cocktail attire. RSVP required. At 2 in the morning, the burner phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Well done tonight. Moretti clearly took an interest. Accept the dinner invitation. We need details about his home security, his staff, who else attends these dinners. You have until Monday to RSVP. I typed back, my fingers shaking. I did what you asked at the gala. That should be enough. The response came immediately. It's enough when we say it's enough. Accept the invitation, or we go to the FBI with evidence of your involvement in your brother's schemes. Your choice. I threw the phone across the room, heard it hit the wall but didn't care. They had me trapped completely. Every step I took drew me deeper into their web, and now they wanted me inside Luca Moretti's home, gathering intelligence that would be used against a man whose only apparent crime was being too successful, too connected, too much of a threat to whoever was pulling the strings. Saturday and Sunday passed in a fog. I called in sick again, spent both days in my apartment, researching Luca Moretti with an obsession that bordered on unhealthy. I learned he'd graduated from Northwestern with degrees in business and finance, that he'd taken over his father's single restaurant at 25, and within a decade had built an empire of a dozen high-end establishments across Chicago, that he sat on the boards of 3 charitable foundations and 2 museums, that he'd never been married, rarely photographed with the same woman twice, and guarded his privacy fiercely. I also learned about the whispers, the speculation that his rapid success couldn't be entirely legitimate, the rumors about his father's connections to the Camorra back in Naples, the way competitors seemed to either sell to him at surprisingly low prices or leave Chicago entirely, none of it proven. All of it suggesting that beneath the philanthropist exterior was something much more dangerous. Monday morning, I returned to work with dark circles under my eyes and hands that trembled when I tried to shelve books. Mrs. Miller took one look at me and sent me to her office with a cup of tea and orders to sit until I felt better. You've been pushing yourself too hard, she said gently, perching on the edge of her desk. Is everything all right, Rebecca? You can talk to me if something's wrong. The kindness nearly broke me. I wanted to tell her everything, about Jacob, about the blackmail, about the impossible position I'd been forced into. But the men's warning echoed in my head. We're watching. How could I know who was safe to trust? I'm fine, I lied. Just fighting off a cold, I think. She looked skeptical but didn't push. Well, make sure you're taking care of yourself. And have you thought about Mr. Moretti's invitation? You should RSVP soon if you're planning to attend. Actually, I was going to RSVP today. The words tasted like ash. Accept the invitation. Her face lit up. Oh, Rebecca, I'm so glad. You deserve nice things, opportunities like this. Who knows? Maybe this could lead to a better position, something more aligned with your education. That's what Luca had suggested too. And suddenly I wondered if the invitation was a genuine gesture or something else. Had he somehow seen through my fade at the gala? Was this dinner party a trap of his own design? I returned to the circulation desk and pulled out the invitation. The RSVP number was a simple text line. I stared at it for 10 minutes before finally typing, Rebecca Hayes accepting for Tuesday, Oct. 24. Thank you for the invitation. The response came within seconds. Wonderful. Looking forward to seeing you. A car will collect you at 6:30. LMA car. Of course. Men like Luca Moretti didn't let guests navigate their own transportation. It was about control, about knowing exactly who was coming and going. I forwarded the exchange to the burner phone number, then deleted the entire conversation from my personal phone. Tuesday arrived too quickly. I'd spent Monday evening shopping with money I didn't have, using a credit card I'd promised myself was only for emergencies. But I needed something appropriate to wear, and the dress from the gala wouldn't work twice. I'd settled on a deep burgundy dress with long sleeves and a hemline that hit just above my knee. Elegant without being flashy. Forgettable, I hoped, though some instinct told me Luca Moretti forgot very little. At 6:30 precisely, a Blacktown car pulled up outside my building. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and an Eastern European accent, introduced himself as Dimitri and held the door open with old-world courtesy. Mr. Moretti is looking forward to seeing you again, Miss Hayes. The drive to Lincoln Park took 25 minutes through early evening traffic. Dimitri played classical music softly and didn't attempt conversation, for which I was grateful. I spent the time staring out the window, watching Chicago slide by, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Luca's home was exactly as imposing as I'd feared. A 3-story limestone mansion set back from the street behind iron gates and mature trees. Security cameras were visible at multiple points, discreet but present. As we pulled through the gates, I noted the sophisticated call box, the way the gates closed automatically behind us, the motion sensor lights that activated as we approached. The front door opened before we'd fully stopped, revealing a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into an elegant bun. She smiled warmly as Dimitri helped me from the car. Miss Hayes, welcome. I'm Teresa, Mr. Moretti's house manager. Please, come in. The interior was breathtaking. Soaring ceilings, original architectural details, but furnished with a warmth that surprised me. This wasn't a showplace. It was a home. Fresh flowers filled the entryway, their scent mixing with something delicious from what must be the Kit Miller. Classical music drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, the same piece Dimitri had been playing. The other guests are in the sitting room, Teresa said, taking my coat. Mr. Moretti will join you shortly. He's just finishing a phone call. She led me down a hallway lined with photographs. I caught glimpses as we passed. A young Luca with an older man who must have been his father, both wearing aprons and covered in flour. Luca as a teenager, clearly at his mother's funeral, his expression devastated. Luca at various ages, always with the same core group of people, their faces aging alongside his. These weren't professional photos or carefully curated images for public consumption. They were memories, personal and real. The sitting room held 6 people when I entered, all around my age or slightly older. They turned as Teresa announced me, their faces friendly and curious. A tall black woman with natural hair and a stunning smile was the first to approach. "You must be the librarian everyone's been talking about. I'm Maya Miller, corporate attorney and apparently the token professional in Luca's collection of strays." She said it with such warmth that the term sounded affectionate rather than insulting. "Welcome." The others introduced themselves in quick succession. James, a high school teacher. Priya, a non-profit director. Marcus, a chef. Alessandro, who worked in one of Luca's restaurants as a manager, and Sophia, a graduate student in social work. None of them fit the image of high society that I'd expected. They were professionals, yes, but working professionals, not the wealthy elite. "Luca has a type," Priya explained, handing me a glass of wine. "Smart, passionate about their work, and usually at some kind of crossroads when he meets them." "How am I doing?" I laughed despite my nerves. "Surprisingly accurate." "He has a gift for spotting potential," James added. "I met him 3 years ago when I was about to quit teaching. Burned out, overwhelmed, convinced I'd made a terrible career choice. He talked me into staying for 1 more semester and connected me with resources I didn't know existed. Changed my whole perspective." Similar stories emerged as the evening progressed. Maya had met Luca when she was fresh out of law school, drowning in student debt, about to take a corporate job she hated. He'd given her a loan, interest-free, to start her own practice. She'd paid it back within 3 years and now specialized in pro bono work for immigrants. Marcus had been working in a fast food kit miller when Luca had tasted his food at a community event and offered him a scholarship to culinary school. "He invests in people," Sophia said quietly. "Not for any financial return, but because he believes talent and intelligence are wasted in our society if you don't have connections or money to start with." It was a beautiful sentiment. It also made what I was doing feel even more monstrous. Luca appeared as we were being called to dinner, dressed casually in dark slacks and a navy button-down with the sleeves rolled up. He greeted each guest personally, clearly comfortable with and genuinely fond of this group. When he reached me, his smile was warm but his eyes were assessing. "Rebecca, I'm glad you could make it. How are you settling in with this group? They're not too overwhelming, I hope." "They're wonderful," I said honestly. "Very welcoming. Good. That's what I was hoping for." He gestured toward the dining room. "Shall we?" The dinner table could have seated 20, but was set intimately for 8. Luca sat at the head, and to my surprise, he directed me to the seat on his right. The meal was served family style, platters passed around, everyone helping themselves. The food was extraordinary, clearly prepared by someone who understood Italian cuisine at a fundamental level. "Marcus made everything tonight," Luca explained, noting my expression after the first bite. "He's been experimenting with my grandmother's recipes." "This is incredible," I said to Marcus, who beamed. "Wait until you try the dessert." I think I finally got her tiramisu right. Conversation flowed easily, covering everything from politics to books to a heated debate about whether Chicago-style or New York-style pizza was superior. Luca participated, but also listened, drawing out quieter guests, making sure everyone had a chance to contribute. He was, I realized, a natural leader. Not through dominance, but through genuine interest in the people around him. Halfway through the main course, he turned to me. "So, Rebecca, Maya mentioned you studied international business. What made you choose library work instead?" The table quieted slightly, everyone interested in my answer. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. The library job was available when I needed it, and I discovered I loved the work. Helping people find information, watching kids discover reading, there's value in that. "Absolutely there is," he agreed. "But you sound like someone who's settling rather than choosing." It was exactly what he'd suggested at the gala, and this time, I couldn't let it pass unchallenged. Not everyone has the resources to pursue their first choice. Sometimes settling is the smart move. Something flickered across Luca's face. Respect, perhaps. Fair point. Though I'd argue that settling is only smart if it's strategic, a temporary position while you plan your next move. Is that what you're doing, Rebecca? Planning your next move? The question felt loaded, like he was asking about more than just my career. Around the table, the other guests watched our exchange with interest. I'm keeping my options open, I said finally. Smart. He raised his wine glass slightly. To keeping options open. The others echoed the toast, and the conversation shifted to other topics. But I felt Luca's attention on me throughout the rest of the meal, a weight that was both flattering and terrifying. After dinner, we moved to a sitting room for coffee and Marcus's triumph of a tiramisu. The space was cozier than the formal sitting room from earlier, with comfortable couches and a fireplace where a low fire burned. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, and I couldn't resist drifting over to examine the titles while others chatted. Find anything interesting? Luca's voice came from beside me, and I jumped slightly. He'd moved silently, now standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, something subtle and woody. You have an impressive collection. The books ranged from Italian literature to business theory to philosophy. Well worn, clearly read. These aren't just for show. I don't believe in owning things just for show. Books are meant to be read. Homes are meant to be lived in. Money is meant to be used. He pulled a slim volume from the shelf. Have you read Calvino? Some. Invisible Cities in college. One of my favorites. My mother used to read his stories to me when I was young. I didn't understand half of it, but I loved the sound of the Italian, the way she'd make different voices for different characters. He opened the book, and I saw notes in the margins, some in faded ink that must have been old, others more recent. After she died, reading Calvino was one of the ways I stayed connected to her, to the language, to the culture she'd left behind. The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. This wasn't the powerful businessman or the rumored criminal. This was a man who missed his mother, who held on to memories through books. That's beautiful, I said softly. He looked at me. Really looked at me, and I felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. You remind me of her, actually. My mother. There's something in the way you move through the world. Careful, observant, like you're always ready to run but hoping you won't have to. My breath caught. He'd seen too much, understood too much. I should probably get going soon. It's a work night, of course. Dimitri will drive you home whenever you're ready. But he didn't move, still standing close, still watching me with those dark, knowing eyes. Rebecca, can I ask you something? Sure, I said, though every instinct screamed danger. Why did you really come tonight? To my home? To this dinner? Was it curiosity? Ambition? Or something else? The question hung between us, loaded with meaning I couldn't quite decode. Did he know? Had he somehow figured out that I'd been sent to spy on him? You invited me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It seemed rude to refuse. The sound was non-committal. Most people I invite are thrilled to accept. You looked terrified when I extended the invitation. I was surprised, not terrified. Were you? He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Because from where I stand, you've been terrified since you walked into Impero Friday night. No, before that. You walked in already afraid. My heart hammered against my ribs. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? His voice dropped lower, intimate and dangerous. Let me tell you what I see, Rebecca Hayes. I see a woman who's running from something, who moved to Chicago 8 months ago with no connections, took a job well below her qualifications, and keeps her head down like she's trying to disappear. I see someone who's very good at observing others, but not so good at hiding her own fear. And Friday night, when you walked into my restaurant, you weren't just nervous about a fancy event. You were terrified of being there, of being seen, of me. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think of a plausible response. He was right about everything except the reason for my fear. I should go. You should, he agreed, but still didn't move. But before you do, I want you to understand something. This city can be very dangerous for people who don't know whose protection they need. There are forces at work that don't care about collateral damage. If you are in trouble, if someone is threatening you, I can help. But only if you trust me enough to tell me the truth. It was a lifeline I desperately wanted to grab, but the men who'd blackmailed me had been clear. Trust no one, especially not Luca Moretti. I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine. Really. He studied me for a long moment, then stepped back, giving me space to breathe again. All right. But Rebecca? He waited until I met his eyes. My offer stands. When you're ready to stop running and start trusting, I'm here. Dimitri drove me home through Chicago's night streets, the city lights blurring past the window. I sat in silence, my mind churning. Luca Moretti had seen through me with terrifying accuracy. He knew I was hiding something, that I was afraid. The question was, what would he do with that information? The burner phone buzzed as soon as I entered my apartment. Excellent work tonight. We received detailed surveillance from your phone's camera and microphone. Very useful. The next dinner is in 3 weeks. Make sure you're invited back. My stomach turned. They'd been listening the entire time, watching through my phone's camera. Every conversation, every interaction, all recorded and analyzed. I'd violated Luca's privacy, betrayed the kindness of the other guests, all because I was too afraid to refuse. I spent that night on my bathroom floor, physically ill with guilt and fear and self-loathing. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't keep doing this. Whatever consequences came from refusing, they couldn't be worse than what I was becoming. I would go to the police, tell them everything, and hope that the truth was enough to protect me. Wednesday morning, I called in sick to work again and headed downtown to the FBI field office. My hands shook as I pushed through the glass doors, approached the reception desk, and asked to speak with someone about fraud and extortion. The receptionist made a call, and 15 minutes later, I was sitting in a small interview room across from Special Agent Victoria Martinez, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Miss Hayes, she began, pulling out a notepad. You mentioned fraud and extortion on the phone. Why don't you start from the beginning? I told her everything. About Jacob, about the men in Millennium Park, about the blackmail and the spying, about Luca Moretti, and the dinners and the surveillance they'd conducted through my phone. I held nothing back, my voice shaking, tears streaming down my face as I laid out my complete stupidity and desperation. Agent Martinez listened without interrupting, taking notes, her expression neutral. When I finished, she sat back and studied me. That's quite a story. Do you have any evidence? The burner phone they gave, you? Text messages? Names of the men who approached you? I pulled out the burner phone, handed it over. All the messages are there. But I don't know the men's names. They never introduced themselves. She examined the phone, scrolling through messages. These are routed through multiple proxy servers. We can trace them, but it'll take time. What about your brother? Where is he now? I don't know. He left Chicago right after our meeting in the park. I haven't heard from him since. And Luca Moretti. You're certain he's unaware of your real purpose in attending his events? I think he suspects I'm hiding something, but I don't believe he knows the specifics. I paused. Agent Martinez, is he actually involved in organized crime? The men who blackmailed me said he had dangerous connections. Her expression gave nothing away. I can't discuss ongoing investigations. What I can tell you is that Mr. Moretti is a person of interest in several cases related to import-export fraud and money laundering. Nothing's been proven, but where there's smoke, there's usually fire. The confirmation settled like ice in my stomach. So the rumors were true. Luca Moretti wasn't just a philanthropist. He was involved in criminal enterprises. And I'd been sent to spy on him by people who were likely criminals themselves. I was caught between two dangerous forces, and the FBI was confirming I'd been right to be terrified. What happens now? I asked. Now we verify your story. Bring in your brother for questioning if we can locate him, and see about tracking down the men who blackmailed you. In the meantime, I need you to go back to your normal routine. Don't contact Moretti. Don't respond to any messages from the blackmailers without checking with me first. Can you do that? You want me to just pretend everything's normal? I want you to stay safe while we build a case. These people, both the ones blackmailing you and potentially Moretti himself, they're not going to react well if they think you've gone to the authorities. So for now, you keep your head down and let us handle it. I left the FBI office feeling both relieved and more frightened than before. I'd done the right thing, told the truth, but I was still trapped, still vulnerable, still caught in a web I didn't know how to escape. The rest of that week passed in tense normalcy. I returned to work, apologized to Mrs. Miller for all the sick days, and tried to fall back into routine. The burner phone stayed silent. I'd turned it over to Agent Martinez, and she'd given me a new one with her direct number programmed in. If anyone contacts you, you call me immediately, she'd instructed. But no one called. No texts, no visits, no men in expensive suits cornering me in public places. The silence was somehow worse than the threats had been. Friday evening, I was shelving books in the library's history section when I heard Mrs. Miller call my name. Rebecca, you have a visitor. I turned to find Luca Moretti standing in the library entrance, looking completely out of place in his tailored suit among the stacks of books and worn carpet. My heart leaped into my throat. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. Rebecca, I hope I'm not interrupting. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. In the neighborhood was clearly a lie. This branch library was nowhere near any of his businesses or his home. He'd come specifically to see me, and the realization sent ice through my veins. Not interrupting, I managed, setting down the books I'd been holding. Did you need something? Actually, I was hoping we could talk. Privately, he glanced around the library, at the patrons studying and reading, at Mrs. Miller who was watching with unconcealed delight from the circulation desk. Perhaps we could take a walk? It wasn't a request. I grabbed my coat and told Mrs. Miller I was taking my break, ignoring her excited thumbs up as I followed Luca outside. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, leaves crunching under our feet as we walked away from the library. Luca didn't speak immediately, seeming content to stroll in silence. But I could feel the tension radiating from him, the carefully controlled emotion. How much trouble are you in, Rebecca? He asked finally, his voice quiet. I don't know what you mean. He stopped walking, turned to face me. Yes, you do. You walked into my restaurant a week ago, looking terrified. You've been jumpy and distracted ever since. And yesterday, you spent 2 hours in the FBI field office downtown. My blood turned to ice. He'd been having me followed. Dimitri noticed you seemed upset when he drove you home from dinner. He mentioned it to me. So I had someone keep an eye on you, just to make sure you were safe. That's stalking, I said, anger cutting through my fear. That's protection, he corrected, his voice hardening. Because the kind of people who send frightened women to spy on me don't usually stop at asking nicely. And yes, Rebecca, I know why you were really at my events. I've known since the gala. The world tilted sideways. You knew. I know everything that happens in my restaurants, in my businesses, in my city. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when two of the Calabrese family's enforcers corner someone in Millennium Park, and then that same someone shows up at my event? Did you think I wouldn't check to see who you really were? What leverage they might have used to force your cooperation? He'd known everything. The entire time I'd been terrified of betraying him. He'd known exactly what I was doing, and why. Then why invite me to your home? Why let me anywhere near you? Because you're not the threat, Rebecca. You're the victim. The Calabrese family has been trying to find weaknesses in my organization for years. They thought you'd be their way in, a pretty woman with a tragic story who could get close to me. What they didn't count on was me recognizing the setup immediately. I felt like I was standing in a nightmare where nothing made sense. The Calabrese family? Who are they? One of Chicago's oldest criminal organizations. They control the ports, some of the unions, various other enterprises. We've been at a stalemate for years, neither of us able to move against the other without triggering a war that would destroy half the city. So they've been looking for leverage, for information they can use to tip the scales. His eyes bored into mine. And you walked right into their trap. I didn't have a choice. My brother, the documents he forged, they said they'd go to the FBI, that I'd be arrested for fraud. Your brother is dead, Rebecca. The words hit like a physical blow. I staggered, and Luca caught my arm, steadying me. I'm sorry. I thought you knew. They found his body in Lake Michigan 3 days ago. The police are calling it a suicide, but we both know it wasn't. The world was spinning. Jacob was dead. My stupid, charming, self-destructive brother who dragged me into this nightmare was dead. No. They said if I cooperated, they'd let him go. They promised. They lied. They were always going to kill him once he'd served his purpose. And they planned to kill you too, once you'd gotten them the information they needed. You were never going to walk away from this, Rebecca. I pulled away from him, wrapping my arms around myself. Why are you telling me this? What do you want from me? The same thing I wanted when I invited you to dinner. To help you. To give you a way out. He stepped closer, his voice gentler. I know you went to the FBI yesterday. I know you told them everything. That was brave, but also very dangerous. The Calabrese family has people everywhere, including inside law enforcement. You telling the FBI means they now know you've betrayed them. Agent Martinez said they'd protect me. Agent Martinez is a good person who means well, but she can't protect you from what's coming. The Calabrese family doesn't forgive betrayal, Rebecca. They'll come for you. Soon. Terror crystallized in my chest. What am I supposed to do? You have two choices. He held up a finger. 1, you trust the FBI, go into witness protection, spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder in some small town far from here, always wondering if today is the day they find you. He held up a second finger. Or 2, you let me protect you. You come work for me, legitimately, and you let me deal with the Calabrese family in my own way. Work for you doing what? What you studied in college. International business. I need someone who speaks Italian, who understands finance and logistics. Someone smart enough to recognize trouble and brave enough to come to me when she's in over her head, even if it took you a week to work up the courage. It was insane. He was offering me a job, a legitimate job, as protection from the criminals who wanted me dead. Why would you do this? You barely know me. I know enough. I know you tried to protect your brother, even when he didn't deserve it. I know you put yourself in danger rather than see others hurt. I know you went to the FBI even though you were terrified because it was the right thing to do. His voice softened. And I know what it's like to be young and alone in this city with nowhere to turn. My mother had no one when she arrived here. People like us, we remember that. We help when we can. People like us. I repeated his words. You mean criminals? He didn't flinch from the accusation. I mean survivors. People who do what they must to protect what matters. I stood there on the sidewalk, my brother dead, my life in ruins, facing a choice between two impossible options. Trust the FBI and disappear. Or trust Luca Moretti, a man whose entire reputation was built on shadows and rumors and dangerous connections. If I say yes, if I agree to work for you, what happens to the Calabrese family? What happens to the men who blackmailed me? I deal with them. You don't need to know the details. I think I do. I'm not agreeing to let you kill people on my behalf. A smile ghosted across his lips. I'm not going to kill anyone, Rebecca. Violence is bad for business and draws too much attention, but there are other ways to neutralize threats, ways that ensure they won't bother you again. I should have walked away, should have chosen the FBI's protection, however imperfect. But standing there, looking into Luca Moretti's dark eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Safe. He'd known what I was from the start and had still extended kindness, had still offered help. And he was right about one thing. The FBI couldn't protect me forever. But a man with Luca's resources, his connections, his power? Maybe he actually could. Okay, I heard myself say, I'll work for you. But I want something in return beyond just protection. Name it. The truth. About who you really are, what you really do. No more shadows and implications. If I'm going to trust you with my life, I need to know exactly what I'm trusting. He considered this for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But not here. Come with me. Dimitri was waiting around the corner in the Blacktown car. We drove in silence back to Luca's Lincoln Park mansion, the afternoon light fading into evening. Teresa greeted us at the door, took one look at my face, and immediately brought tea and disappeared without being asked. Luca led me to his study, a room I hadn't seen during the dinner party. Unlike the warm sitting room with its books and fireplace, this space was pure business. Multiple monitors displayed security footage from various locations. A large desk held several phones and tablets. The walls bore maps and photographs I didn't understand. My father came to Chicago from Naples in 1985, Luca began, settling into a chair and gesturing for me to sit across from him. He was 17, spoke no English, and had nothing but a recipe book his grandmother had given him. What I didn't tell you before is why he left Italy. His family was Camorra, not high-ranking, but connected. When he refused to join the family business, they gave him a choice: leave or die. He chose to leave. He paused, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He built his restaurant with legitimate money earned through backbreaking work. But when the old Italian neighborhood started gentrifying, when property values soared and developers started pushing out long-time businesses, he found himself in debt to people he couldn't pay. So he made a deal with a Chicago crew, protection in exchange for using his restaurant for certain business meetings, for laundering certain funds. Your father was involved with the mob, I said quietly. My father did what he had to do to survive, to keep his business, to provide for my mother and me. And when he died, those obligations passed to me. The restaurant, the debts, the connections, all of it. I was 25, fresh out of college, and suddenly responsible for an empire built on compromises I didn't fully understand. He stood, moved to the window, his back to me. I could have walked away, sold everything, started fresh. But that restaurant was my father's dream, my mother's legacy. So instead, I learned the game. I paid off his debts, renegotiated agreements, and slowly, very carefully, I started building something different. Legitimate businesses that could stand on their own. Charitable foundations that actually helped people. A reputation based on results, not fear. But you're still connected, I said. To the criminal world. I'm connected to everyone, Rebecca. That's how you survive in this city. You know the right people. You maintain the right relationships, and you never let anyone see you as weak. The Calabrese family sees me as a threat because I've been gradually squeezing them out of legitimate businesses. They can't compete when I offer better terms, better working conditions, and actual respect to the people I employ. So they've been looking for ways to drag me down, to find evidence of crimes they can use to destroy me. And did they find any? I asked. Are you still involved in illegal activities? He turned from the window, met my eyes directly. I'm involved in gray areas, business dealings that aren't quite legal but aren't prosecutable, relationships with people who have criminal records, investments in enterprises that might involve questionable practices. But the days of my father's full involvement in organized crime, those ended years ago. I'm clean enough that the FBI watches me, but can't touch me. Connected enough that criminals respect me, but can't control me. It's a careful balance. And what about the Calabrese family? What are you going to do about them? A dangerous smile curved his lips. That's already in motion. While you were talking to the FBI yesterday, I was meeting with every family head in Chicago. The Calabrese operation has been sloppy lately, drawing too much attention, making too many enemies. I simply pointed out how much better business could be without their constant interference. By tomorrow, they'll no longer be a problem. Not because I killed anyone, but because they'll have lost all their protection, all their alliances. They'll be forced to leave Chicago or face consequences from their own people. It was elegant and ruthless and absolutely terrifying. You did all of that just to protect me? I did it because they threatened something I value, and I don't allow threats to stand. The fact that it protects you is just an added benefit. He moved back to his desk, pulled out a folder. This is an employment contract. $60,000 starting salary, health benefits, retirement plan. Your role will be coordinating international suppliers for my restaurant group, working with Italian and other European distributors. Completely legitimate work that uses your education and language skills. I took the folder, scanned the contents. It was exactly what he'd described. A real job with real responsibilities. And the protection? How does that work? You'll have a security detail, at least until we're certain the Calabrese situation is fully resolved. You'll also move into one of my buildings, a secured apartment with better locks and surveillance. Consider it a signing bonus. He paused. This is real, Rebecca. A genuine opportunity to build a life here, to use your skills, to be part of something that matters. I'm not asking you to compromise yourself or do anything illegal. I'm offering you a job and protection because you deserve both. I sat there, the contract in my hands, my dead brother's choices still echoing in my mind, and made my decision. Okay, I'll sign. But on one condition, which is, if I ever find out you've lied to me, if I discover you're more involved in criminal activity than you've admitted, I walk away. No strings, no obligations, no consequences. I get to leave. He extended his hand. You have my word. Though I should warn you, people who join my orbit tend to want to stay. I shook his hand, his grip warm and firm, and felt the last piece of my old life fall away. Rebecca Hayes, the frightened librarian running from her brother's mistakes, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who worked for Luca Moretti, who moved in his world, who had chosen to trust a dangerous man because sometimes danger was the only real safety. 6 months later, I stood in my new apartment, looking out over Lake Michigan as the sun rose over the water. True to his word, Luca had dealt with the Calabrese family. They'd left Chicago quietly, their operations absorbed by other groups, their former allies suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. The FBI had closed their investigation into Jacob's fraud, with Agent Martinez admitting they had bigger cases to focus on. My work for Luca's restaurant group had proven more fulfilling than I'd expected. I'd renegotiated contracts with Italian suppliers, established new relationships with vintners and specialty food producers, and even traveled to Naples to visit some of the sources my father's recipes had come from. Luca had accompanied me on that trip, shown me the neighborhood where his mother had grown up, the view she'd loved, the culture she'd tried to preserve. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being afraid of him. I'd started to see the man behind the reputation, the person who'd built an empire, not through violence, but through strategy and patience and genuine care for the people he employed. The Tuesday dinners continued, and I'd become part of that group of strays he'd collected, people whose potential he'd recognized and nurtured. And when he'd kissed me for the first time, standing in his office after a particularly successful negotiation, it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. I wouldn't say I loved working in the gray areas of Luca's world. I wouldn't say I was comfortable with all his connections or choices. But I'd learned that morality was complicated, that survival sometimes required compromises, and that a man could be both dangerous and good, ruthless and kind, connected to criminals, while still building something worth believing in. Chicago had become home. Luca had become my anchor, and the terrified woman who'd been cornered in Millennium Park had transformed into someone stronger, someone who'd chosen her own path instead of having it chosen for her. When my phone had buzzed that October evening with a text from unknown men demanding a meeting, I'd thought it was the end of my carefully rebuilt life. Instead, it had been a beginning. Not the one I'd planned or wanted, but the one I'd needed. The one that led me here, to this moment, watching the sun rise over a city I'd learned to love, working for a man I'd learned to trust, living a life I'd never imagined but couldn't imagine leaving. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best destinations. Sometimes the people who seem most dangerous are the ones who save you. And sometimes you have to stop running and start trusting before you can finally find home. What did you think of Rebecca and Luca's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating?